We'll do a review of Likutei Sichos in Chelek Yud Ches, in the first Sicha for the Parsha Shelach. The Rebbe explains the first Rashi, it's a Rashi Sicha in the Parsha. Rashi asks, what is the connection between the end of the previous Parshas and the beginning of our Parsha? The Rebbe is going to explain what Rashi's question here is. And the Rebbe is going to learn a tremendous interpretation over here. The Rebbe teaches that the problem with the Meraglim was the Iskei Dibor. It was that they occupied themselves with negativity. Not they spoke Lashon Hara. It was the Iskei Dibor. The Rebbe will also learn a tremendous hero that the fact that one should stick out their neck for another person, that Moshe Rabbeinu was Soimech these parshas just to try to give the Meraglim an opportunity to do teshuvah. The Rebbe also talks about the idea of ro, that they actually saw versus so they should have known, and many, many other interesting points in the Sikha as we will learn inside. So let's learn inside now. Shlach, Ois Aleph. In Ascholos HaSedra, in the beginning of this Sedra, stellt sich Rashi of the Werte. Rashi bases himself on the words, Shlach L'cho Anoshim, sent to you people. This was what Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem says to Moshe, this is the beginning of the Parsha, he says to him, Shlach L'cho Anoshim v'yosuras Eretz Canaan, send people based on your desire, send people, let them investigate the land of Canaan, and that I'm giving to Bnei Yisrael. The Eibishter tells them he should send one person per tribe, Konosi Bohem. And this Parsha follows immediately the end of Parshas Nosoi, Ba'aloischa. In the end of Parshas Ba'aloischa, Pasuk says in Perek Yud Beis, "Vatedaber Miriam va'Aaron b'Moshe." So Miriam and Aaron spoke on Moshe. Aloidus hakushis asher lokach. Rashi explains he separated himself from his wife, and then Hashem was very upset with them, and she developed Tzaras, and she was closed, and the people waited for her for 7 days. She had to be separated until she became clean after 7 days. And Vayichar Hashem bom vayelach, and then Vahanon Sor, and Vayifen Arnal Mirvini mit Tzaras. And then it was that the people waited for her. Vayitzak Moshe Hashem Leimer Kel Norafonolo. Hashem should heal her. Moshe Rabbeinu cried out to Hashem, and then. So he says, and then she will be gathered in, and she was closed at the house of Miriam. And then it says, Miriam. And the people waited until Miriam was gathered in back into the community after she was outside of the camp. So she was brought back in. And then the people traveled from Chatzeris, which is where they were, to this other place where they went to. And after this, we go to the beginning of this week's Parsha, to the Shlach L'cha Anoshim, by Dabar Hashem Moshe Leimer, about sending the spies. So here, the Rebbe explains that the Rebbe brings down the Rashi, the Werter, Shlach L'cha Anoshim. So it says, Loma Nismecha Parshas Meraglim, the Parshas Miriam. So why was the portion of the Meraglim, which is the beginning of Parshas Shlach, placed close to the portion of Miriam? Rashi answers, Lefi Sheloksal Iskei Dibo, for she has been smitten, she got Tzaras. Hashem punished her with Tzaras because of her occupation with Diba, with her speech. As we'll see, the Rebbe will explain this very well later on, the Iskei Diba, what it means. Shadibra be'ochiha. She spoke against her brother. She spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu, saying that Moshe Rabbeinu separated from his wife. Urashoyim halolu, and these evil people, the people from sent to the as meraglim, they saw, they witnessed this, and they did not take a lesson from this to stay away from speaking diba against Eretz Yisrael, and that's why these portions are placed next to each other. So first of all, the Rebbe explains what's the problem. The way the Rebbe makes the cheshbon from Rashi and the Gemara, but it's certainly that the seventh day of the closing, that Miriam was closed, was on the 28th day of Sivan. The Meraglim were sent on the 29th day of Sivan. So it turns out that the next day after Miriam was back into the camp, after the 28th, the very next day, the story of the Meraglim, they traveled from Tzaras, and where the story of Miriam took place, and then they went to the Midbar Paran, and over there we have the story of the Meraglim. So it seems like it fits right after the story of Miriam comes the story of the Meraglim. So why is Rashi asking Loma Nismacha? And besides that, Rashi, even if it's not exactly fitting, Rashi doesn't usually ask why one thing comes after the other. That man verstehen. As we already spoken many times, as from them, from the fact, was nor in gezählte Ertel, only in very specific places, a few places, counted places. Rashi will give an answer for the reason. Rashi will explain for smichas parsha. Why are parsha next to each other? Is muchach. So that is evident from that we see, since Rashi doesn't usually do that, as al derech hapshat, that based on the style of pshat, of simple meaning, which is the derech Rashi bepirush al Torah. This is Rashi's path, Rashi's style in his commentary on the Torah is the pshat. Is kinkasha nit parvozayin and davki di parsha smuchas. That's not a question. Why are these portions close? So b'chlal, it's not an issue Rashi doesn't address in most cases why one parsha comes after the other one. But achas kama v'kama, how much more so that Rashi doesn't address an issue like this when the parshas come al seder azmanim. If the portions come chronologically in order, that one thing followed the other, Rashi will not explain why does this parsha come after the other. They belong after each other, so there's no explanation in Rashi usually. So how come in our case is nit muvan bin didan? So in our case it's not understood. Actually, this is questioned by the commentators. Since sending of the meraglim is vorgekommen took place gleich noch parshas Miriam, immediately after the portion, the story with Miriam. Auf morgen noch die Shivas Yimei Hezger Miriam, the day after of the 7 days that Miriam was closed and was outside of the machane and the camp, waited for her. It was his doal derech hapshat di shaila. So why is there a question over here in the simple learning over here? Loma nismacha. So why is Rashi saying loma nismacha? So that's to understand the chlal. What's Rashi's problem? And then in Oiz Beis, the Rebbe takes apart the details of all the specific language Rashi uses over here in this Rashi. Beis. So Oiz Beis. Oich dat men verstehen. Also, we need to understand kamo the yukim in Lashon Rashi. We have to understand several pieces in Rashi's language. Aleph, number one, Rashi uses lifishalokso al iskei diba. She was smitten. She got the Tzaras for her occupation in diba. What is the meaning of diba? Diba doesn't necessarily mean bad, as the Rebbe will bring down, but she was smitten because of Lashon Hara, it would seem. So Rashi should say, Shelach al Lashon Hara. Rashi gedarf zogen al Lashon Hara. Rashi should have said for speaking bad tongue. She spoke bad. V'er alein zogt in Parshas Shmois Rashi himself in the portion of Shmois, talking about Miriam, he says, Sheloksa Miriam a Lashon Hara. He says Miriam was smitten because she spoke Lashon Hara. Why is Rashi saying Iskei Dibur? It's sort of a non-clear language, say Lashon Hara. Especially, as the Rebbe points out now, the word Diba doesn't necessarily mean bad. The kasha is noch starker. The question is actually stronger in Avaita, the pasuk later on Rashi Taichus. The pasuk says, "Vayitzibu diba sa'aretz ra." They spoke diba sa'aretz. It says ra. Rashi says the word diba sa'aretz. Taich Rashi of the word diba. Rashi says diba. Kol hitzos diba. Anytime you say when a person brings out diba, spreads diba or takes out diba, lashon chinuch devarim. That means just to talk a lot, lots of words. Sometimes it's for good, and sometimes it's for bad. Just talking a lot is called diba. That's why the pasuk has to say dir vayitzu as diba saret ra, that it was ra, because diba saret itself doesn't yet tell you that it's bad. It just means you talk about it. So since diba doesn't mean bad, so why does Rashi say that she was smitten because of the preoccupation with talking? In Diba is nit muchrich ken chet, so it doesn't mean necessarily that she did a sin. It is also possible to be good, as Rashi says, yeshna l'toiva. So why are we saying she was smitten for iske Diba? Should have said lashon hara, what she did bad, wrong. And Beis, as the Rebbe will explain later on in his answer, that actually the chait of the Meraglim wasn't so much that they spoke bad, it was because they preoccupied themselves with Bareden and to discuss and to prolong, which was something that is a negative, as the Rebbe will explain later on, Ba'arichas. Beis. The second question the Rebbe asks here is, Farvos is Rashi Moisif, Shadibra Ba'achiyah, that she had spoken against her brother. She spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu. Miriam spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu. But why is that important to know? She was smitten because she speaks Lashon Hara. Does it make a difference? She speaks Lashon Hara against her brother, against somebody else? What is important here is that she was smitten because of the preoccupation with the Diba. Why is there such a difference to us to know about whom that she spoke, that she discussed her brother, she discussed Moshe Rabbeinu? Why is that important? And number three, why does Rashi prolong in his language? And he writes, and these evil people they saw. Why Rashi could have just said, and they saw it. Why did Rashi call them and call them out? These Rishoyim. They saw what took place, and they did not take a lesson. Why call them Rishoyim Halalu? These Rishoyim. We know who we're talking about. As I said, we know we talk about the Meraglim. And number four, Hadiyuk, the specific language that Rashi says, Ra'u, they saw, and they did not take a lesson from what they saw. Why doesn't Rashi not use another lashon that Rashi used elsewhere? Ra'u musar, they saw a lesson that Miriam was punished, and they didn't stick to it. It's elsewhere in Chumash. Over here, Rashi specific says, Ro v'lelok musar, as the Rebbe will explain that. That pasuk is in the Devarim Yud Aleph Beis. Hey, Farvosis are mighty in the Dibur, question number 5. Why does Rashi quote in his Dibur Hamaschil, in his opening, in the heading for this pasuk, Eich diverter l'cho anoshim. Shlach, Rashi says l'cho anoshim. Technically, Rashi is just explaining why Shelach is next to Baal Oischa, the end of the Parshas Miriam. Why does he quote from the pasuk l'cho anoshim? As wohl given genug zu meitig sein, dem Wort Shlach, it would have been sufficient if Rashi would have quoted the word Shlach. Al derech v'in onei Parshas Baal Oischa. And also in the Parshas Baal Oischa, Rashi over there asks for Rashi, Zech Mefarish Smichas Parshas. Rashi also explains that. Why is the Parshas Baal Loischa next to the Parshas and the Parshas next to the Karbonos of the Nesiim? So over there, Rashi explains over there, Lo Manishnucha Parshas HaMenoira, Baal Loischa, which is the Parshas HaMenoira. The Parshas HaNesiim, to this section of the Nesiim, which is discussed in the end of Parshas Nosei. So what does Rashi quote from the pasuk? He doesn't quote anymore. Rashi places himself and he quotes from the verse only the word ba'aloischan. He says, "Why need ba'aloischan sanedis?" So why does over here Rashi quote shlach lecha anoshim? Okay. So the Rebbe is going to explain this basically by first explaining the question of the Ramban to understand the Chalal. What is it so terrible that the Meraglim, what did they do so bad? They came back a report. They were sent to give a report, and they gave the report the way they understood it. And even before they concluded, which we can't go with, they weren't asked to give an opinion. They were just asked to look, and they concluded Leinuchal. But we see that Vayas Kolev, the Rebbe brings out, that took place in the pasuk before that. So what did they do so bad? And the Rebbe says we can find reason and rationalization to try to explain really what is it that they did, because even if they said B'derech HaTeva, they didn't see. They were sent to see how B'derech HaTeva, and they didn't see. Even if Hashem did miracles, how could Hashem do such a miracle? It seemed like impossible to them. What is so terrible? And the Rebbe said that the terrible the Rebbe was going to learn was that instead of going to Moshe Rabbeinu and discussing it with Moshe Rabbeinu and telling him what their concerns are, they came and they made a big to-do about it, and they started to Iski Dibur, and this is what the problem over here is. Let's look inside. Gimel. But das Verstehen behagdim the Kushya von Ramban. We'll understand this by introducing the question that the Ramban asks. Was is azoi groß der Chet von the Meraglim? Was it such a great sin of the spies? The scouters, their shlichus is doch given. What was their mission? What were they sent for? Was to Eisgefina, to find out es haaretz mahi, what kind of a land is it? And what is the nation that sits in that land? Is he strong? Is he weak? What kind of cities? Are they fortified cities? Easy cities? So they were Izma Pisham Machatosim, quoting the Ramban. What's their sin? What is their guilt? What did they do? Was they home tell them emes that they related the truth? Was they gezer? They said what they saw. As Am Ha'om, it's a powerful people. And there is fortified great cities. Adla Shemayim. So they told back what they saw. Well, maybe they shouldn't have concluded. They wouldn't ask to say Leinuchalalis, but they were already saying things wrong from the beginning, because we say Vayas Kolev immediately. You cannot answer. Azer Chet is Bashtanen in them Zogam. That what was their sin in by they said in Zogam Eretz Echeles Yeshveho, that it's a land which consumes its inhabitants. Or there is a Moisiv Zayin to them Bozeum Gizen. Or the fact that they added to what they have seen. Also a conclusion, as we won't be able to go out, for he is stronger than him and than us, which means we won't be able to do it. While the Ramban zogt, as the Ramban says, even before they says the words, so Golev got involved, and Kolev made the people silence. So why did he make them silence to the people over there? As you see in the pasuk Chav Ches, they said, "Efes ki azo oma yeshe ba'aretz, ha'orim tzuras gdelus me'oid, v'gam ilida anok." So they're telling them about the people. Amalek yeshe beretz haknani. And then, right after that, Vayas Kolev Esa'om. That took place, and Vayemer Olinali Virash Nois Kiyochel Nuchalo, we will be able to. So Kolev interrupted them as soon as they brought down Efes Ki'aza'om. They say it's true that it's Zovas Cholev Udvosh, Ashalachtonu b'zapirio efes ki azaom vorim betzuris gedolos, and it tells them about Amalek, which is all seemingly true. Then vayas kolim. Afterwards, they say further that or they said that was later on. So you see clearly that noch eder sem gesagt, dass die Deburim hat sich schon Kolev eingemischt und bei Jas Kolev ist auch Goimer. And he silenced them. He's moving from them. So from that we understand as the Friedike Reid, Efes ki Asa Om Goimer, Va'orim Goimer, that just what they said before, that the nation is strong, powerful, the big cities, they were not proper. That's why Kolev had to silence them. So what did they do? What did they do wrong? What is it wrong with them by saying what they saw? And it was wrong right from the beginning. And another thing, the Rebbe says, even what they said, you can justify. Even their following words and their conclusion of the Nuchalal is that we will not be able to go up. We can find a justification. We can learn a merit for them. Nitachet, that it's not a sin. They nit gesagt loy nala. They say we're not going up. Mirvelen nit arev gain hepech tzivu Hashem, which would be going against the Hashem's command. We will not. They didn't say that. Nor loy nuchal lalos. They said loy nuchal. We will not be able to. Loy zeir obschatzen the starkheit from the Yoshveh. It's based on their estimation about the strength of the people that sit in the land, und die koiches from Eden, and the powers that the Jews possess. The Jewish people don't have, according to nature, the power to conquer Eretz Yisrael. So, why is that such a sin? We can say, if they said loy nala, we're not going up, they mean they're going against Hashem. But if they say loy nuchal we're not able to go up, so they believe that b'derech hateva they don't have the koyach to go up. So what's so terrible? Furthermore, even when they say that he's stronger than him, and as Rashi explains, they said it towards Hashem, that stronger than Hashem. So when you learn it according to the simple meaning, this does not constitute a denial of Hashem, nor as the they were just basically saying that the nations are so much stronger than the Jews are, as we can't even imagine how we will be able to succeed even if Hashem did miracles. And you see this actually from the response of Kolev. Kolev did not say that it's not going to take a miracle, but he says, even if it would take the outstanding miracle of going up to the skies, we will do that because Hashem can do anything. But it just means that they just estimated that in ordinary miracles, you cannot accomplish that, which was actually reasonable. And why would that be a chait? Because the far is Kolev's taina, and for what was Kolev's argument against the Meraglim? His response given, he didn't argue that we could naturally conquer Eretz Yisrael. He didn't just say that Hashem will overcome the nations by performing regular miracles. Not Oloy Nale. He says we will go up. What does it mean, Oloy Nale? As Rashi explains, if Hashem says us to go up to the sky, make ladders, and go up to the sky, and that's whatever Hashem says, all of it will be successful. So basically, he says this would require like similar to going up to the sky. That you have to listen to Hashem without any calculations, even if going to Eretz Yisrael is bedugma to azach, is be similar to a matter, which had never, even miraculous, never happened. We were never going up to the skies, and still we would do that. So the argument means that it's something super out of nature. So they didn't believe, or they didn't expect that. That's what they said. The Baal does the mekuvan in Shluach HaMeraglim is given. Since the intent of sending the Meraglim was in order to figure out and find out the starkheit von Yoshvei Haaretz, the strength of the people that live in the land of Eretz Yisrael. Und durch dem sich können geräten zu Milchama Tivis. And by finding out they can prepare themselves to a natural war. Und al piteva is the Abschatzung von the Meraglim, and based on nature, the estimation of the Meraglim. Loi nuchalal is given emes, it was true. Hein was is azoi der Sturm? Why is there such a storm? Why is there such a complaint? Von der Cheit of the sin, damit was euch herausgesagt, die Maskone von der Abschatzung, the fact that they expressed the conclusion from their estimation. So it doesn't seem to be such a strong sin. That's what basically the Ramban asks, as the Rebbe articulates it and brings it out, that it doesn't seem like everything else that was said over there doesn't seem to have the severity of a sin. And this is what Rashi is coming to explain by asking Loma Nismacha. This question Rashi answers by explaining Loma Nismachu Lefishlok Zechulu. The smichas haparshiyos, this closeness of these portions, gitzu verstehen, it gives us an understanding in vosis barstanen der cheit hameraglim, in what did the sin of the meraglim consist of? What was their sin? Okay, but still, in Oizdal, first we have to explain why is Rashi, the Rebbe asked, why is Rashi asking, why is it brought close? Why is it written next to there when it happened right after it? And the Rebbe explains certain things, even if they take place one next to the other, they should not follow in order to distinguish between these two cases. The Rebbe will bring an example, Parshas Balischo, with the interruption of the Parsha in the middle to separate between two Puranias. Miriam was a tzadekis. The Meraglim failed and caused all the Yidden to sin. Why would we bring together? We should seemingly make a space there. And to teach us and to answer what was the sin of the Meraglim. Let's look inside Dalet. The beer in the explanation is Dos was Rashi fragt Loma Nismacha Chulu. This that Rashi asks, why was it brought close? Although that the sending of the scouters, the spies, took place immediately after the portion of Miriam, is because in the literal style of the pasuk, when we learn it, darfman amol mafsik zayin. Sometimes you need to interrupt zwischen zwei parshas, between two portions. Even though that chronologically they needed to state one next to the other, but still there is a reasonable logic by Pshitush and Mikra that they should not be. By their parsha, Rashi already similarly had explained in the portion in Baal Yisro, it says Vahi bin Soyorin. It seems like it was placed out of place over there. Rashi says, "V'lo manichtav kan." Why did the Torah put it in place, the Vahi bin Soyorin, these two psukim, right in the middle of the story over there? Because there were two sins, as Rashi explains. V'lo manichtav kan, there were two sins of the Yidden over there, and because of the two sins, it was placed to make an interruption. So you see that sometimes things shouldn't follow. We shouldn't have one on top of the other. But by us, there's another reason why we shouldn't. Right? It would seem. Loma nismacha. As far as our matter, Shas, but let it say Parshas, when we learn these two portions, Parshas, Miriam, Parshas, Meraglim, the portion of being a portion of the Meraglim, ain't enough that say the one following the other. When you made the Retzchaveg, from Lashon Hora, and both of them we're discussing Lashon Hora, Keman Hobma Gavaldik Kuntos, one could make a great mistake, and think as Miriam and the Meraglim, that Miriam and the Meraglim zijn in the Zalber Darke Chazashon, that Miriam and the spies are in the same step, same level, God forbid. Or maybe they're similar. They're close to each other in their contents, what they did. Lashon Hara by Miriam, Lashon Hara by the Meraglim. So maybe there's a moral equivalence over here. And that's why they're placed next to each other. It's quite obvious. You see that there's really no moral equivalence because Miriam, we all waited for her after 7 days. And after the Meraglim, the entire Jewish people were punished not to be for 40 days. Even though you can see the difference from one extreme to the other extreme. By the results of the sin. By Miriam, and when it comes to Miriam, is Miriam, even after Miriam was locked up, is Miriam. So the people did not travel until Miriam was gathered in. And why? Rashi says this was a special honor that Hashem distinguished and gave to Miriam. So you see, Miriam got this honor. But look what happened, the results for the Meraglim. Aleph, the Meraglim is Vayamusu b'Magefa. They themselves died in the plague. Beis, number 2, they caused the ganze Doiris Yiplu b'Midbar. Entire generation will perish in the desert. And Gibel, Iberdem is Ubneichim Midbar, so that their children of the people of the Doir, of the Midbar, would have to spend 40 years wandering in the Midbar. So, why do we need to tell you that they shouldn't be separated because some people can make a mistake? So, we don't need to separate it because it's obvious. No. But there's still, Kemen Ober Zogen, one would say that there's still an equivalence. The Torah puts them together. The difference from the result is because Miriam didn't cause anybody else to sin, and the Meraglim did, but it's not. But the sin itself, there should be some sort of a moral equivalence in their sin. So the Torah should not write them together. Rebbe explains. Kemen Ober Zogen, we can, however, say, Ados is nicht der Fahr, was die Meraglim seine gewähnt Rishoyim chulu. It's not maybe because they were evil that they are much different than Miriam. Nor weil durch nicht sein zohir bidiburum, because they weren't careful the way they spoke. Seinen alle Yidden nichshel geworden. So all Yidden stumbled in Merida b'Hashem, in rebelling against Hashem, and in nicht wollen gehen in Eretz Yisrael. They did not want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Mashenkin by Miriam was ihr Lashon Hara is given blois an inyan proti. Her Lashon Hara was only a personal matter. It was just her, but the equivalence may still be there. Und der Fall ist Rashi meitig in dem Dibur HaMaschil euch die Wörter not only Shelach but Lecho Anoshim. Because Rashi is the what does it mean? Hashem says Lecho Anoshim. That means that they were distinguished people. So this further emphasizes the possibility of misconstruing that Miriam somehow is equal to the Meraglim, because they were l'shlach l'cha anoshim. Rashi was l'cha anoshim. But does it noch mer mechazik the efshoros l'tois? That further strengthens the possibility for making a mistake. As the Meraglim zayin gleich, that they are equal, akoparim enlech, or similar to Miriam. As the Meraglim zayin geschickt geworden, l'cha, which is l'daitcha. That's for Moshe. That was l'cha meaning you, to Moshe's opinion, Moshe's view. And Moshe sent them such a mission, a responsible mission that was so important. That points to the fact, this shows us that they had the greatest milas, they had the greatest advantages. When it's tam milas, and not only were they just great people, but in the minyan ashlichas befrat, but specifically for this mission, biz the Torah ruftzei anoshim. The Torah calls them men. That he's sending these people for this particular job, and he's sending men. Was meant Rashi teaches. This means Rashi says, what does it mean, men? Loshon chashivas, that they were important. Kshedim hoyu. Initially, they were kshedim. So all this gives us a room for a mistake. So Rashi says, so why do we put it together with Miriam to give you a room to mistaken that they have a similarity? It's good to show Zatos. So in order to reject such a mistake, as the Meraglim seien nicht chas v'sholm auf an ähnliche Darge, that these Meraglim are not, God forbid, on a similar level to Miriam, hat die Teure lechere gedacht mafzig sein. The Teure should have interrupted. Zwischen the zwei Parshias, in between the two portions, with another inyan, with another subject matter. The Rebbe fragt Rashi, that's where Rashi asks, Lomo nismecho Parshas Meraglim le Parshas Miriam. So why was the portion of Meraglim brought close to the person of Miriam? So, as the Rebbe explains, even though chronologically this follows, but since a moral equivalence can be gained from the fact that they're next to each other and think that they're on the same level, should have interrupted. So the answer that Rashi gives is to point out that the Torah put it together to explain to you the great sin of these Meraglim, that they had just witnessed. That's why we put it together, even though there could be a mistake. But the Torah wants to explain to us that we should understand why the Meraglim were so punished. Rebbe asked before, what did they do so bad? It was punished because they just saw what took place with Miriam, the sister of Moshe, when she spoke about Moshe. As Rebbe will explain all the details. And yet they went and they continued on the bad path. That's why the Torah brings it together over here. Hey, and for Rashi, this is what Rashi answers. She got smitten for occupation in Dibo. These evil people saw what took place, and they did not take the less. Torah is masmich. The zwei parshiyos, the Torah brings these two portions together in order to relate noch an inyan, an additional aspect in Goydul Chet HaMeraglim, in the great sin of the spies. Which, according to Pshat, gives us the answer, Goydul Einsham, what the great punishment for them, as they haben gehabt erst od bismichas, just now, very close by, a Gelegenheit zu nehmen Musar, an opportunity to learn a lesson from Miriam, from the story of Miriam. They did not take the lesson. Rashi says specifically the Lashon, the Ro, was so obvious you didn't even need to learn it or figure it out. The Musar is given, the lesson was neat in an oifen. It wasn't in a situation as menot and gedarft arois lernen, that you needed to figure it out, to learn it out, durch hereintrachten sich, by reflecting. In was men hat gesehen, in what you have seen, men hat os nor gedarft nemen zu sich. Loch, you just got to take it. It was just so obvious. You didn't have to learn it. Rov le lochum. Von dem, wo sie haben gedarft nehmen, Musser von Meise Miriam. The fact that they needed to take a lesson from the story of Miriam is muchach as die Chatoim seinen in demselben Sub. That is evidence that the sins are in the same category. I'm not talking, not the same moral equivalence from Miriam and the Meraglim, but it's the same category of sin. Selben Suk, der Far ken men nemen the Musar v'shalila fu chet ha-meraglim. That's why you can take the lesson and to reject this sin of the Meraglim from the rejecting of the sin of Miriam. The Far is verstanding the Sofat Gosh Rashi. That's what we understand the addition that Rashi emphasized. Urishoyim haloluchu. This Rishoyim, Rashi wants to point out these are Rishoyim, but these Rishoyim could have had an opportunity. They're not in the same moral equivalence to Miriam, but it's the same category that they could have learned from it. Rishoyim the mitbavonter as der Vergleich zwischen den Meorois, that the comparison of this happening for the Beit Parshis is nor b'negei dem chet. We're not comparing the people that committed the sin, Miriam and the Meraglim, but we're comparing the sin. Obe b'negei dimension, but we talk about dimension, the people. Rashi says, "Rishoyim alo, these are these are evil. Nit stam chatoyim v'choytim." Darius doesn't say sinners, things like that. No, Rishoyim alo, these are evil people. Heipech b'tachlis for Miriam, which would be totally opposite of Miriam. Was mehot erst b'smichas gelernt. We were just closely learned as kovet cholok la'amokim, that Hashem gave her honor. So these are Rishoyim, but they could have learned from the sin. Okay? What is it special about the sin of Miriam? And we'll understand that way. We can understand why that category of sin was Miriam. What was the Rishoyim? They should have seen, and they should have not just taken to themselves the lesson and not behaved the way they did. But first, we have to understand. The Rebbe explains now in his book. So, what was it that Miriam really did? So, Miriam didn't intend to degrade her brother Moshe, Miriam, and Miriam was in pain for his wife, for Tzipora, that he separated himself from her. The problem was Iskei Dibor, as Rashi says. This was a discussion of talking about. She should have gone to Moshe Rabbeinu and discussed with him why he's doing what he's doing. But talking about it was, and the Meraglim didn't take it the lesson, and they went with their issues publicly, and they made a whole big revolt. But it's not understood. In was is Take bestanden der Chet von Miriam? Why? What was actually the sin of Miriam? Das was sie gerät of Moshe. She discussed about the Isha Kushis, the Tzipora that he has married, and now he divorced her. Is doch das given an emes. First of all, that was true. He divorced her. Doch ihr megarish given, given. He divorced her and he caused her pain. Miriam nicht gesucht reden schlecht zu Moshe. It wasn't that Miriam was looking to speak bad about Moshe. She did not intend to degrade him. Sie hat nur nicht gemacht ihr Abschätzung von Meiles Moshe. She just did not have a proper evaluation of how great Moshe is. As it was necessary. As is eine noch mehr von der Meile was be Moshe Dibra Hashem. They're greater than just in Moshe Hashem spoke to, because their argument was that Hashem speak to Moshe and to us also. We still stayed married, and they didn't realize that Moshe has a greater Meile even than the Meile of Hashem speaking to Moshe. Ziod gerechnet. She figured, Miriam, as Moshe had nicht gedacht, that Moshe should not have separated himself from his wife. So it turns out she didn't estimate properly the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. Is then zu dem nicht verstehen the godless von Moshe l'tachlisa. So the fact that she did not fully appreciate Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness, kommt ihr as einisch, then she deserves such a punishment. Zokt Rashi, that's what Rashi explained. As der chet is bastanden, the sin consisted not in dibara. It wasn't bad talk, not in iske diba, occupation in diba. The etzem zach was sich vernommen. The fact itself that she occupied herself, that she occupied herself with this talking, mit reden, ba'arichas, v'chulu, to speak at length, wegen Moshe. B'shas Miriam had gesehen, she should have confronted Moshe without discussing this. B'shas Miriam had gesehen by Moshe. And on Haga was the first statement, she saw that Moshe was doing something, a conduct that she doesn't understand. She should not have discussed it, speak about it. And in the way of occupation, even though she only said the truth, she had no intentions to degrade him. If you preoccupy yourself to speak about Moshe, does not bring you to speaking good. So they can only lead to speaking in the opposite. Zu verstehen Hanhoga Moshe, and if she wanted to understand Moshe's Rabbeinus, she should have asked him in a question mark and quietly. Similar to this was the sin of the Meraglim. They did not say any lies about Eretz Yisrael. Aber their dibur is given in an oifen, but the way they discuss it, von iske dibur, they preoccupied themselves with dibur. They had so talked about umbaret and spoken of the starkai. They discussed the strength of the Yoshvei Haaretz, of those who sit in the land, bis zu abschrecken Eden, till they scared the Jews from Bechlal and gain Eretz Yisrael. So at all, they didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. If they were wondering how Hashem is telling us to go to Yisrael, at the time that those inhabitants of the land are so powerful, they should have spoken in short, or the Pashat Frag Moshe, or they should have simply asked Moshe. These asks, the preoccupation, the iski dibur, the occupation in this speeching of talking about it. To totally talk about sich wegen der Starkheit von the Yoshvei Haaretz, about the strength of those who live in the land, bis zur Reisung de Maskona, until they actually eventually said the conclusion, like Nuchalal, we can't go up, but nor gekend der Führen, that could only lead in Sumerida to rebel. Bis zum Zogen, till they said, Nit nor Reish v'Rashuva Mitzrayim, let's put a leader and let's go back to Mitzrayim. In Ois Zayin, the Rebbe will explain how come Miriam actually did speak instead of going to Moshe. Well, how come she behaved in that way? The Rebbe said the problem was that Miriam couldn't believe that her brother Moshe should be so much greater. And the same problem was the Meraglim. They believed since they were chosen for this mission, so that's it. It can be nothing more. If they don't feel that they're capable, so they have a right to sort of pass judgment. Let's look inside. Zayin. Wie kommt es take as Miriam soll sich äußig sein in Diba of Moshe? How come it actually takes place? Moshe says she should occupy herself with Diba and Moshe. It was verstandig von der Taine. That's understood from the argument that Miriam said. Harak ach be Moshe diber Hashem, haloi gam bonu diber. Did Hashem only speak to Moshe? Hashem also spoke to us. Wissendig as bonu diber, since they knew that Hashem spoke to us, to Miriam and Aaron, hat sich bei ihr nicht abgelegt. So she did not really get as the Hechigkeit from Moshe legabe zei, that the greatness of Moshe relative to them is azoi grois. It is so great bis zum Tzaras sein, Isha Koshis Sheno Bekoil, to the extent that he's going to cause pain. To the Isha Kushis, as Rashi translate that, it means that she was beautiful in everything. She was an exceptionally, and caused her this pain. They didn't think that he should be allowed, but he's doing this correct. They didn't estimate his greatness. They didn't think that that will exempt him from the fulfillment of the Hashem's command, not to diminish the time that one is obligated to spend with his wife, to the extent that he separated himself from his wife. So they didn't think that he was allowed to do that because they undervaluated Moshe Rabbeinu's, how much greater it can be than them when they're also, Hashem spoke to them. Ein Zeh is given by the Meraglim, similar was by the Meraglim. But Zeh is Oizgikumen, by them it appeared in the way they figured, as Vibald, as Moshe Zeh given. Since that Moshe chose them Al Pi Hashem, based upon Hashem, is in their Shlichus Nitscheiches, in this mission, it's not, is Nitscheiches andere sollen sein Hecher, that in this mission that anybody should be higher, verstehen besser for Zeh, and to understand better than them. Vibald as by Zeh, since by them, Shlucha Havai, they were agents of Hashem, is given Vanihi Beinenu Kichagom. We felt in our eyes like grasshoppers. They came back and they said they looked in our own eyes, we were like grasshoppers. So therefore they were certain, they were of the opinion, with a certainty, that this is actually according to, based on Hashem, truthfully, as far as all Yidden, and therefore they took out a conclusion from themselves of all Yidden. We won't be able to go up. Since going to Eretz Yisrael was not something that made sense to them, so they occupied themselves in Masbir Zayin, Das Barucha. Then they explained this at length in Diba, in the talk. They badmouthed basically Eretz Yisrael. Not just saying facts, it's bad-mouthing, it's bared. And that's why we also understand now, based on this, Favos Rashi's Meisif, why Rashi adds the words that I've asked before, as Miriam Dibra B'Achia, she spoke on her brother. Speaking of her brother explains, this is more explains how the Meraglim did not learn the lesson. For Miriam and in them Inyan, von Obschatz nach zweit nach Farzich, in this aspect of not being able to evaluate another higher than themselves. They should have learned that somebody else may know better than they did, just like Miriam made that mistake. She didn't evaluate her brothers higher. By Miriam is given a prat. In the Mchet was Dibra B'Achia. One of the details of the sin was that she spoke against her brother. But her brother, she spoke against her brother. Her brother she thinks is almost like her. But her brother is Chatzi B'Sorei, as the pasuk says, it's half of a flesh, come from the same parent. Beteva, and naturally, schwer zuzugeben auf eigenen Bruder, and it is difficult to give to your own brother as is Chatzi B'Sorei. He's half of me. In other words, I'm equal to him, basically. Und zusammen damit bin ich Hecher von sich. And together, with being half of me is infinitely greater than me. On your own brother, it's very hard. So Miriam's underestimation was her brother. So she didn't think her brother was that much infinitely greater. And yet Miriam got punished for that. As the Meraglim have nicht getort, betrachten jede Szene mit sie. The Meraglim were not allowed to think more than this, even as alle Yidden, Koilel, Moshe, Aaron, Chulu, all Yidden, including Moshe and Aaron, müssen sie noch gehen, noch sehr achlote, must follow their decision, and they need to convince everybody that not to go to Eretz Yisrael or Bared in Eretz Yisrael. In Nois Ches, the Rebbe further explains the deed that Rashi says, Ro, the fact that they actually saw an Ein Nedoi Maria Lishmiya and yet they didn't take the lesson. Ches. No chadik is in them Pirush Rashi. There's another emphasis in this Rashi, or a specific language that Rashi uses. They saw and they didn't take a lesson. The l'cheir is the word ro. It would seem that this particular word ro, they saw ibrik, and so Gedarb Stein should have stated they didn't take a lesson. Wird das verstehen, Bahagdim Atmiya in Klolus Sipur Amaraglim, will understand it by first introducing a general surprise in the story of the Meraglim. Was ist Chadish geworden by the Meraglim durch their Besuch in Eretz Yisrael? What came new? What did they find out new when they visited Yisrael? Und if I feel to the extent that those say they're shrocken, that this scared them bis zum Teinen, they argued, we cannot go up. The alle Sachen, was sie haben dort gesehen, all these aspects that they saw there, that the people are powerful, those sit in the land, etc. They knew this from before. Warum? While they were in Egypt, they already knew what is their matzav, the situation. What is the situation? What takes place in the land of Canaan? And Beis, and number two, the Rebbe brings over there from the Ramban, but number one, that we knew what's going on. And Beis, in the Shiras Yam, all of the Eden said, they melted all those people that sit in the Canaan. So they knew about all inhabitants of Canaan, and their strength. Anders ist doch keiner verloren, nicht als Namegu. And there's more, because there would be no surprise. They melted. They melted because they were strong. So they knew about the strength of the Yeshua Canaan. Und von deswegen seien sie gewähnt, gerät zu gehen in Eretz Yisrael. And yet they were prepared to go to Eretz Yisrael. So what happened now is the beer in them, the explanation based on the saying of our sages of blessed memory. A hearing is not the same as seeing. It's as long as they just heard about the strength of the inhabitants of the land. They weren't affected by their difficulties. And they were ready to go to Eretz Yisrael. When they saw with their own eyes how this people is powerful, etc., so that impacted them. That they should retract their earlier agreement. Was the come upon them. Many times was emphasized in their discussion. They said, Ra'inu, we saw. They saw it by themselves. He showed them the fruit of the land. And that's what Rashi has to emphasize. They saw. Rashi has to say they saw. In other words, they just heard it, maybe that wouldn't have changed their mind. Here too, this lesson, they actually witnessed this. Since they just themselves saw. Miriam and what took place with Miriam, and they should have had the same force to overcome that test from the Ra'inu in Eretz Canaan, from what they've seen in Eretz Canaan, in the fact what they've seen just take place by Miriam. If they had only heard about Miriam's punishment, and then you could not demand, why didn't you not take Musar? Rashi has to add the words, not just Leilok Musar. If they just Leilok Musar, while the Sibba was gebracht zum Chet, because the reason that brought him to this sin is given Beria, was seeing, und in the sin as Koyach halten sich von Chet, and what would give them the power to stop this sin was Bleish Bishmi, only hearing. Is Rashi mad? That's what Rashi says. No. If you need zindikun, also the strength to not to sin is given Miriam was also seen. And still they didn't take the lesson. In Oistes, the Rebbe will bring out that we see the greatness that Moshe Rabbeinu, notwithstanding, he could have written down other things in between the parshas, but he made sure to write the parshas together to give the Meragla an opportunity to learn from Miriam. He put them right in there. So learn from Miriam. The Rebbe goes through a discussion that even though it turns out that it's putting down a little bit Miriam by putting them together, but in order to benefit them, we should try everything. Let's look inside. Test. From the Yonim Floim Mechelik Halacha of the Torah in the Pirush Rashi, from the wondrous matters in the portion of Halacha that we find Halacha in Torah, that in this Rashi, the Chidude Akapanim, the Rebbe says, maybe just for sharpening, for the intellectual exercise of Bahagdim Hashayla, by introducing a question. These Torah for Masmich Parshas Miriam to Parshas Meraglim. How is Taka the Torah making the portion of Miriam to the Parshas Meraglim? Miriam, and this can cause a suspicion about Miriam, as he is etvos b'deimet to the Meraglim, that maybe she's a little bit, somewhat similar to the Meraglim. We have a command that you must be clean from Hashem and Yisrael. In other words, you're not allowed to do anything to allow other people to make a mistake. And here, Yisrael, you're not being the key because you're putting them together. Maybe we can answer that Rashi's view on the Torah. We have Rashi goes like the view. There's a machlokes in the Gemara in Gittin. Rashi goes like the view. It's not that the whole Torah was written together, but every portion was written and then they were put together. Moshe Rabbeinu immediately wrote down every portion. So maybe it makes sense to say, before the Meraglim got bad and everything else, the first time when it was Shelach L'cha, they weren't bad yet. That was still good. So Moshe Glach Fashrim Yed Parsha. They say Mistaber Leimer, as they're only from Parsha Shlach, at the beginning of the Parsha Shlach, als was his vorgekommen in demselben Tag Chavta Sivan, what took place on the 29th day of Sivan, und mit dem hat sich verendigt der Shlach L'cha, that ended the Shlach L'cha, because later on they went for 40 days, but the Shlach L'cha ended on the 29th of Sivan. The Shikun und the Shaykhs from Moshe and the Shlichus and Moshe's Rabbeinu's connection to it, Shlach L'cha, that was all done on the 29th day. So, on the 29th day, what Moshe Rabbeinu was given Azoris. Moshe Rabbeinu was quick. Gleich Farshrim immediately wrote it down because they need to uphalten that Zukumme von noch a Parsha in Torah Shebiksav, not to delay the additional portion in the Torah Shebiksav. So he wrote right away the Parsha Shlach. So move on to Pashut. As jeder Tag b'midbar, that every day in the Midbar, which would include the 28th and the 29th day of Sivan, of when the 7th day of Miriam's clothing, and then the 29th when they send the Meraglim. Were a tremendous amount of Pasiring and happenings that took place by the Shishim Riba, 600,000 Hagavorim of the males, then you have to add as much and so much and so much for Noshim, women and children. Befratas is noch zugekommen der Nosu vayachnu, because they traveled from Chatzeres to Midbar Poran, so there was a traveling and there was a camping. Piruk vakomas hamishkon, you had to undo the Mishkan and raising it, v'chulu, etc., etc. From the Merois is given a ribu godu. There was a lot of things happening. Zwischen Hos of Miriam, the Chof Ches Sivan, when Miriam was gathered in on the 28th of Sivan, Koidim Siluk HaMishkan, before the Mishkan has been removed, Unamira Shlach L'cha, and the saying of Shlach L'cha. Noch an Oishteln, the Golem, that was already after things were set up, and the Mishkan, noch Batikravayna, like Kulcham Chulu, Pasuk in Parashat Dvarim says, you all came to me. So there was a whole big affair, a whole big to-do before Moshe Rabbeinu actually sent Shelach Lecha. Thousand happenings of mafsik events zwischen house of Miriam that really interrupted between Miriam's gathering back in and the sending of the Meraglim. Kolel oich murois, also not just some happenings, but for mitzvahs. They traveled by Hashem's word, which is a mitzvah. The Onan moved, and there were mitzvahs in between. They brought the korbanos in the Mishkan. It's the smichas is ober given. So, what does it mean? It was close. It wasn't actually close ever. Smichas was given in Moshe Rabbeinu's Schreiben from Parshas Meraglim to Parshas Miriam. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote this next to the portion of Miriam. So they should have learned the lesson, not from what happened, that this happened next to this was close, because in happenings were a lot. But when it means that they didn't take Musar, that the portions were written next to each other. Und der Pfarrer hat man verguckt, auf dem, was man stellt, die Parsha rein, in a mokum was noch mokum lechshad. And that's why they looked away and they put the portion, even though there is a place for suspicion about Miriam, kedei zu bavornen farhiten the meraglim, in order to protect the meraglim. So what the nismacha was, the Torah wrote in such a way to try to protect the meraglim. So that means that it's close to each other. As light of a shver, but there's a difficulty. We don't say to a person, sin, so your friend will benefit. So here we're telling Yisim Nikiyim, we're putting Miriam and Achshad, so we're not being Mekayim to be clean from Hashem and placing an Achshad in order to protect the Meraglim, because this was the only Lochel Musa they should take. But there is a rule, as we don't say do a sin so your friend will benefit. We're putting Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu is putting Miriam in that place, in order to benefit for the Meraglim. He says, Rashi uses Lochel Musa nit. It's not that they sin. As the Rebbe explains. And the Rebbe will explain that when do we say if the sin has already been done, it's for the punishment, but to prevent them from the sin in Lechatchila, then we do it. Let's look inside. In Yud, in Ein Chulu Shizke Chaverach, Ein Odom Lodom Chatei B'dech Shiz Chaverach. We don't tell you to sin so your friend will benefit. Is Rashi Mefarish, Shelo Yischayev Chaverach O Einish Chomer. Your friend should not be punished a more serious punishment. Why does Rashi talk about punishment? Don't sin so your friend shouldn't sin. Now, why about punishment? Isn't it move on? Rashi should have said, as she is meant as chaverach, that nitzel werden von over sein achet chomer. You do a smaller sin, so your friend will be saved from a bigger sin. Just so you shouldn't get a stronger punishment. Yes, the key is, as kavanos Rashi is with the day in Tosfos, that Rashi's intention is as the opinion in Tosfos. As those was ein chulu. When do we say we don't sin? Is dafke when the meister isur kvar nasa. The person has done the isur, and therefore you can prevent him from a greater punishment. We say no. But if we're talking about protecting your friend, that to begin with he shouldn't come to a serious sin, not just the punishment, but the sin. Then we do say small. Do a small sin in order to protect your friend from a serious sin. The far is Rashi Madgish. That's why Rashi emphasized only so it should be Einesh Chomer. Then we're not going to tell you, put yourself out, do a smaller Aveda, so he should be protected from a serious sin. So Madgish Zayin, Rashi is emphasizing that those was in Evrim Chulu is not when there is Chvar Nasa. It's only when it's already been done. So there's only an issue of a punishment. Then don't do it. Will vermeiden von ihm bloß dem Einesh. But when you can prevent from the Aveda, then you would stop him. Is verstandig. You should do the smaller sin for him. Verstandig. Was Torah gekent da reinstellen Miriam and Achshad. Why the Torah was allowed to put Miriam in this suspicion durch Smichas HaParshis by making the Parshis closer. Von Parshis Miriam haben die Meraglim gedacht uplernen, because what they should have learned from it, verhitten sich also mechatchila nicht heute sein. They shouldn't have been sin. Das Rashi Merames mit der Werte v'loi lochu Musar. They didn't take the lesson, while the Tachlin from Musar is der soll sein verschmartet. They should have protected and not done the Avera. So verhitten a mention to protect the person is only kumen to achet, so he doesn't come to a sin, bring him to an hogi yeshora, to bring him to a proper straight conduct. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parsha Shlach Tovshin Chofei.